How's that for a slice of fried gold?
Oh, you think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast that celebrates the legacy of all of the genre stuff that you like.
Pornhub for 6 minutes before starting the show.
Oh man, that's quality stuff, though. The people want to get to know you, and they want to know what you're into. I think personally,
we're into pornography.
Who's not? I saw Pornhub tweet the other day, guys, stop flagging the videos for nudity.
Oh man, sorry to interrupt your intro there, Gary.
No, I think they got it. They know what they're listening to, and they're already fed up. But hey, thank you so much for listening. We're happy to have you. I'm Gary Horne. I'm one of the hosts.
I'm co-host Justin Bishop. We are joined today by a special guest, writer, comedian, and the clown prince of podcasting, Mr. Todd Davis.
That's very sweet of you, actually.
He's podcast. He's not the podcast co-host that we wanted, but he is the podcast co-host that we deserve.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. I'm here to bring all those cringeworthy a few cans of beer and a couple of blunts.
Most of the cringeworthy stuff that exists in the world today, I think, was sparked by the movie we're discussing.
You're not wrong, sir. You are not wrong.
So this week we are continuing our look at Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy with the film that I guess gives the trilogy that name, 2008's The Dark Knight. Last week we talked about Batman Begins. Batman Begins was a hit. It was a success, both critically and commercially. It was the 8th highest grossing film of 2005 in the U.S., which I thought it would have been higher than that, but it was that's pretty good.
2005 was a rocking year, I guess.
I think there might have been like a lingering, just still a little bit of a sting from, and I know we're not talking about Schumacher's stuff, but I think there might have been a few people who were just like,
8th highest grossing film is still pretty damn good, and it was the 9th grossing worldwide. It was nominated for cinematography, as we discussed last week. It's been called one of the most influential films of the 2000s. It basically spawned the modern comic book film genre as we know it today. So, of course, Hollywood does what it always wants to do when a movie is a big success, and they want another one.
Yep.
So they wanted a sequel. Warner Brothers and DC wanted a sequel to it, and they wanted the creative team from the original film to return. Nolan, when he was making Batman Begins, wasn't sure that was going to be the case, but he signed on pretty quickly in the wake of that film's release.
Hey, just for the record, if you want to know, I just pulled it up because we're in the age of the internet. This Wikipedia article has Batman Begins listed as 9th, but I can sort of see some of these. Number 1 was Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. And number 2 is episode 3. Number 3 was Chronicles of Narnia, then War of the Worlds, King Kong, Madagascar, Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Wait, for the year. For the year. Okay. That's what I was like.
Films of 2005. Mr. and Mrs. Smith beat it. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory beat it. Then Batman Begins.
Ugh.
Just barely above by like literal hundreds of thousands of dollars above, just almost like a presidential race. Batman Begins did manage to squeeze out a victory over Hitch. So
how about that? Now, according to Box Office Mojo, Batman Begins is number 7.
Oh, well.
Above Madagascar.
Well, nobody knows then. I guess I don't know.
Well, we do know is that
Mojo.
Box Office Mojo is like the industry standard for box office numbers. What we do know is that it was beat by Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which is sad.
Well,
sad.
To me, it's a number 1. A number 1.
Well, I guess they should have gotten Johnny Depp for the Joker.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, well,
Please no.
to me, it's
A number one. A number one.
Well, I guess they should have gotten Johnny Depp for the Joker.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
yeah.
Please no. So Christopher Nolan was, of course, fully willing to return for the sequel, but he also had enough clout to say to WB that he's like, hey, if I'm going to return, then I want to be able to do a not Batman movie in between. I wanted a palate cleanser so that I'm not just immersed in the world of Batman for the rest of my life. And he did. In 2006, he directed The Prestige, which starred Hugh Jackman and, of course, his Batman co-star Christian Bale. That movie, again, the Prestige is awesome. Maybe we'll talk about it on the show one day.
Yeah.
It has held up incredibly well. And honestly, I think it's in the top 2 or 3 Christopher Nolan movies. It was a major critical and commercial success as well. It brought in over $109 million at the box office. That same year, 2006, Christopher Nolan movies. It was a major critical and commercial success as well. It brought in over $109 million at the box office. That same year, 2006, production on the next Batman film began, and Nolan announced the title of his follow-up to Batman Begins, a film that would hit theaters 2 years later and become what is considered possibly the greatest comic book movie of all time. I guess we can debate that, but I think that is a general consensus. That movie, of course, the movie we're talking about today is The Dark Knight.
Where do we begin? A year ago, these cops and lawyers wouldn't dare cross any of you. I mean, what happened?
So what are you proposing?
It's simple. Kill the Batman. Here's my card.
Rachel's told me everything about you.
I certainly hope not. You once told me that we'd be together. Did you mean it?
Bruce.
Oh, you have no idea. I've seen now what it would have to become to stop men like him.
The night is darkest just before the dawn. And I promise you, the dawn is coming.
And here we go. This city deserves a better class of criminal.
And I'm gonna give it to him.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Dun-dun, dun-dun.
Is that you doing the score?
Yeah, a little bit of the score there.
Good job.
Thanks.
So before the release of Batman Begins, screenwriter David S. Goyer wrote a treatment for 2 follow-up sequels that would introduce the Joker and Two-Face to Nolan's version of Gotham City. So his original idea was to have the Joker as the second film's villain, and Harvey Dent would be a character in it, right? And then the first draft of The Dark Knight, he cited The Long Halloween as a major influence on the film's storyline. We talked about Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale last week. And he also credited the Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil story, The Joker's Five-Way Revenge from 1971, in which the writers kind of reintroduced the Joker. Is that a story that you're familiar with, Todd?
To be honest, anybody who's looking for, a really solid, like classic Joker story, it's a really great place to start. You can get it on Comixology for 99 cents if you keep your eyes open. It's worth giving it a look.
It's just the one where the Joker says boner a lot that you always see in those memes and stuff.
I don't recall. It's been a while since I've read it, but yeah, I don't know.
So although Goyer wrote the first draft of the script, the final screenwriting credits would go to Nolan and his brother Jonathan. So for research, Christopher Nolan had his brother watch Fritz Lang or Mabuse. Have you guys heard of this movie? Are you familiar with it?
I am not familiar with this.
Yeah,
movie.
Outside of research for this episode today, no, I have not.
It's been one that I've never seen it. It's been one that I have always I'm not always, but for years have been curious about because I love the Fritz Lang movies that I have seen. It's one I believe Criterion released way back in the day, and Nolan called the film the essential research for anyone attempting to write a supervillain, because the Dr. Mabuse is a sort of supervillain character. And that movie is actually a sequel as well. Fritz Lang did a film in 1922 called Dr. Mabuse the Gambler. So this movie, it came out about 11 years later. He created a sequel to his silent film. I don't know. It was kind of funny that both of them, that he's using a sequel as as research for his new sequel.
Is Testament also silent, or is it a talkie?
No, it was out in 1933, so it's just using a sequel as research for his new sequel.
Is Testament also silent, or is it a talkie?
No, it was out in 1933, so it's a talkie. Fritz Lang's first talkie was M, which I think was 1931 or 32. So this would have been like one of his follow-ups to that. Which M, by the way, if you've never seen, not to get on a Fritz Lang tangent too much, but M is one of the best like serial killer movies ever made.
Fun.
Highly recommend it.
Nice.
So Nolan decided to avoid any sort of origin story for the Joker once they decided on him as like the main villain for this. He instead wanted to portray his rise to power. So in an interview with MTV News, he said, this is a quote from Nolan, "The Joker we meet in The Dark Knight is fully formed. To me, the Joker is an absolute. There are no shades of gray to him, maybe shades of purple. He's unbelievably dark. He bursts in just as he did in the comics." So what he's saying, we don't know how he became the Joker. We're not getting Joker is an absolute. There are no shades of gray to him, maybe shades of purple. He's unbelievably dark. He bursts in just as he did in the comics. So what he's saying, we don't know how he became the Joker. We're not getting that creation story like we did in Tim Burton's version. The Joker just is. He's already here. He just comes out of nowhere and rains hell upon Gotham.
And that was always kind of his thing in the comics was, I mean, of course, until Killing Joke.
Right.
Nobody really attempted to give him a definitive origin story. He was always just kind of this omnipresent, super evil,
almost like a force of nature.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best way to put it. Just like a force of nature.
Well, what's interesting is one of the things I like about the Joker is that he's supposed to be just unpredictable and just wild. And you don't, at any point he could do anything. I think the second you start diving into like an origin story, that makes that all the more believable, which I think I was reading a lot about Chris Nolan and Jonathan Nolan. God bless them, because they left David Goyer's name on the script. I saw a quote from him where he said, "I can't believe my name is on a movie this good." But they were reading a lot about game theory is what they talk about a lot when they made this movie, which for anybody that doesn't know is like, under like normal capitalism, I could pay Todd $100. Say, I'm going to give you $100 if you could make something I really need, or like if you can run a mile in 7 minutes, and Todd can like predictably like try to train and get better and get good at running, and he does it, and I pay him $100. That's like the standard thing. But like game theory's like, but what happens when you're playing chess, for instance? I guess that'd be a good one. It's like, that's two people are playing chess and they both want to win. Now each move that one person makes is predicated on what the other person did right before that, and so they're whatever it's determined by like what the other businesses are doing. So game theory is about like trying to figure out like, what's this person going to do next, basically. But the thing with it is like, there's always the completely unpredictable side of things, that human nature is such that you may never really know. You may never nail it down, because a human at some point will duck when they're supposed to jump. And so like, it's about trying to nail that down. Can you ever predict what this person's going to do? So I think that's where it plays in with the Joker stuff. It's just having this unpredictable, this wild card in the middle of everything. And Batman's so straightforward and focused. They're opposite ends of the spectrum for each other.
Right.
Well, I mean, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, but once we start discussing the ferry boat scene, that's where the prisoner dilemma comes in. And I sort of fell down a rabbit hole about that, but we'll get there in a minute, I'm sure.
But I do think that the decision that Jonathan and Christopher Nolan made to not delve into the Joker's origin story, I think it makes the Joker a more, like Gary said, unpredictable threat. But also, this isn't the Joker's story. This is not about him as a character. Harvey Dent, in fact, is the one with like the story arc. He's the one that changes the most throughout the story, even more so than Batman.
Right.
This is Two-Face's origin story, not the Joker's. The Joker's just like I said, a force of nature who is facilitating the change, in both Batman and in Harvey Dent.
That's a really
you're absolutely right about that.
Good job, Justin. Let's end this thing.
All right, we're done. So several actors from the previous film, including Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Gary Oldman, and Morgan Freeman, all returned for the sequel. But of course, there was one key role that was recast, and that was the role of Rachel Dawes. So initially, it was reported that Katie Holmes was planning to come back for the sequel, but she ended up turning it down inexplicably to film a movie called Mad Money, which is not starring Jim Cramer, but stars Diane Keaton and Queen Latifah.
And Katie Holmes was never heard from again.
Right, yeah. Mad Money, I recognized the poster when I looked it up. So something triggered, like I guess I remember the trailers or something, but it has been largely forgotten, of course. Was barely noticed at all when it was released. It barely broke even at the box office, and it's sitting at like 22% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it got pretty bad reviews. Roger Ebert gave it 1.5 stars. So she turned down a movie that currently sits at number 4 on the IMDb top 250 for Mad Money.
I recall, and maybe you guys can corroborate this or deny based on, because I'm sure
I was spending a lot of time with her at this time.
The
apology here that was probably the decision-making process.
Yeah.
Maybe Mad
It
Money.
may have been somewhere behind the scenes.
The story, the line that I heard was she was bringing the wrong type of attention to the show, so she was not asked back.
Interesting. Well,
how true that is, I don't know or
after
remember.
Batman Begins, she was certainly in talks to return. So I don't know at what point that changed, but regardless, Maggie Gyllenhaal stepped into the role. Maggie Gyllenhaal is very good in the role. I think she's arguably better than Katie Holmes was.
I think she's fantastic. I saw like Sarah Michelle Gellar, Isla Fisher, Emily Blunt, and Rachel McAdams all were interested too.
See a couple of those working. Yeah. I could really see Emily Blunt working in that role. But Maggie Gyllenhaal,
Rachel McAdams, because didn't she end up working with Chris Nolan on something else? Or am I thinking?
No,
I can't recall anything. Really.
I think so.
I'm mistaken about that.
Working in that role. But Maggie Gyllenhaal,
Rachel McAdams, because didn't she end up working with Chris Nolan on something else? Or am I thinking?
No,
I can't recall anything. Really.
I think so.
I'm mistaken about that. That's why I'm not. That's why I'm a special guest.
All right, let's end this thing.
So as for new characters in the film to be cast, of course, we're talking Harvey Dent and the Joker. So Aaron Eckhart ended up getting cast as the Joker, but before he was cast in the role, Liev Schreiber, Josh Lucas, and Ryan Felipe had all expressed interest in the role. Mark Ruffalo had actually auditioned for the role. Matt Damon and Hugh Jackman were also reportedly considered for the role as well. Ultimately, Nolan went with Aaron Eckhart, who he had also considered for the lead role in Memento years earlier.
I wish I had a cigarette here so I could become that meme and like light up and just be like, Josh Lucas, there's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
It's the last time you watched Sweet Home Alabama.
Right. Or that one movie with Jamie Foxx. I think it's one of the pilots.
Jessica Biel?
And I think it was Jessica Biel. You're right. Yeah. And then they had a robot, an AI.
Yeah.
It goes bad.
Wow.
It was like their flying buddy.
Uh-huh. So for the role of the Joker, some of the actors who publicly showed interest in the role included Paul Bettany, Adrian Brody, Steve Carell, and Robin Williams. Steve Carell is the weirdest choice out of those, to be honest. I remember hearing talk of Robin Williams at the time. I think that would have been a horrible choice, as much as I love Robin Williams.
Well, I feel like he was tied to it always back, like
in the 80s.
Every version.
Everybody has fakes. Like, how crazy would it be if Robin Williams went bad?
Right.
They finally got him eventually with like
Christopher. He had worked with Nolan as well. He had worked with Nolan on Insomnia.
That's right.
There was precedent for it. But of course, Nolan wanted Heath Ledger, who he'd wanted to work with in the past on several projects, including Batman Begins, where Nolan approached him for the role of Bruce Wayne Batman, but Ledger turned Batman Begins, where Nolan approached him for the role of Bruce Wayne Batman, but Ledger turned it down. I guess it wasn't interesting enough for him. So Ledger gets cast as the Joker, and to prepare for his role, he lived alone in a hotel room for a month by himself, not really leaving, kind of working to create the character's posture, his voice, his whole personality, like he's cultivating this personality. He even kept a diary where he wrote as the Joker, like in character as the Joker, recording the character's thoughts and feelings. Like he basically lived as the Joker for a month.
Jeez.
It's probably not great for your mental
Probably not. Have either of you guys seen that documentary, I Am Heath Ledger?
I did see some of it, actually. I had some notes from it. I mean, I know one of the things was, his voice coach on the movie, Jerry Grinnell, I think was his name here. He said that that licking the lips tick came from, there was a prosthetic they used in his mouth. It would start to come off, and he would like have to put it back in place with his tongue or something, but it just eventually became
this like reptilian sort of. That's interesting, because that's a very that kind of a thing that you think about when you think about his version of the Joker, is that weird little tick.
Because he's got all of these weird ticks, and I was seeing somewhere where like Nolan asked Eckhart to not have any tick.
He didn't want him doing like a big cartoony villain voice when he finally turns into Two-Face.
Yeah, he wanted it to be way less showy. I think was the word he used for it. So like Eckhart was like modeling after like Robert F. Kennedy, I think is what he said in one interview.
Yeah, he even had his hair. He grew his hair out and had it styled and like lightened, like the color lightened to make him seem more like a Kennedy type.
And I think this was right after Thank You for Smoking too. So I think that even lent, like he had that. I think Nolan saw that, thought he was like a perfect DA here. The stuff I saw with Ledger was like, obviously, like you said, just was like, no, it's this guy. It's always been this guy. I think he thought, his exact quote for it was, he knew from the second he met him, he was fearless. That was the thing that he thought would mean the most. He also just talks about the eyes, because I think this is a Nolan thing, that he just loves people's eyes. Just like last week, that was the thing that sold it with Bale. But yeah, that hotel room sounds crazy, man. Like he's in there developing like his laugh, every single tick. We've
all seen the video, like the side by side of him and Tom Waits, like a Tom Waits interview from the 70s where they sound exactly alike. So of course we'll never know if that was an actual inspiration, but it seems plausible as well.
He got to talk a little bit too to Jerry Robinson, I saw, who was one of the original creators of the Joker back in 40. Like they brought him on as a consultant, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, very cool.
But yeah, I mean, and the look of him, I've seen everything from like he was going for a Sid Vicious and Malcolm McDowell and Clockwork Orange.
See the killers, the Glasgow smile going on.
Yeah, exactly. That grin, like it has that, what's the movie? The Man Who Laughs.
Absolutely.
So Ledger was also allowed to shoot and direct the videos that the Joker sends out as warnings, which I think is really interesting. And Nolan was so impressed with the first shoot that he did that he didn't even show up. He didn't feel the need to be present when Ledger shot the video, the next one, which was when the Joker kidnaps the reporter that's played by Anthony Michael Hall. Like Nolan's like, you got this. I don't even need to be there, because he was just doing that shit on his own, which I think is great. I would have loved to have seen. I feel like Ledger would have become one of those actors who becomes a really interesting director if he had been given the chance.
Well, I think even in that documentary, I Am Heath Ledger, they talk about him as a director, and Ben Harper talks about working with him on a music video project or something, and just talking about what it was like to have him and how he was such a great creative mind and just artistically. Ben Harper talks about working with him on a music video project or something, and just talking about what it was like to have him and how he was such a great creative mind and just artistically speaking, just really amazing. Breaks the heart that he didn't get to.
He was also apparently a master chess player. Did you guys know this about Heath Ledger? Like he would go out in New York and like play people out on the streets chess and always win. Like according to his mom, which who you'd take with a grain of salt, I guess. But he was like close to becoming like a grandmaster. Dude was like a genius. Like
he should have worked with Kubrick.
Right. Well, that would have been tough.
Kubrick. I was just thinking of the chess thing. Didn't Kubrick like to play chess?
Yeah, but Kubrick was dead by almost a decade by this point. So,
well, he would have won that one too.
So some of the other actors that appear in small roles in the film include
play chess.
Yeah, but Kubrick was dead by almost a decade by this point. So,
well, he would have won that one too.
So some of the other actors that appear in small roles in the film include Todd's old friend Eric Roberts.
Yeah.
Here, quick fun fact about Todd Todd. Todd was in a film, not just a film, a faith-based martial arts film.
Yeah.
That starred Eric Roberts. And by in it with him, I mean, Todd was like an extra.
Yeah, I was an extra. You really have to look hard to even catch a glimpse of my shoulder, I think. But I did get to hang out with Eric Roberts for like 3 days on set. It was actually really cool.
Nice guy.
Very nice guy. He is all about the work, man. He
loves mustard.
Yeah, he loves mustard.
And the Lord.
And yeah, and he's a working actor.
He loves a paycheck.
He loves
a paycheck.
Yeah. But it's kind of cool that he'll show up. He'll show up and do the work.
Somewhere that, like, I mean, he won over like Bob Hoskins and James Gandolfini auditioned for Maroney. And
really?
So
wow. I mean, he's great in the role. He really is.
I actually did get to because I didn't want to be that guy, because when quick story of us on the set, while we were there between shots, one of the PAs walked by him and I saw him lean over and whisper, "It was Ramirez," and I was just like, "Oh, don't do that." But when I got to finally talk to him, I was like, "Hey, just to let you know, like, huge Batman fan." And, like everything else, as they announced certain casting, I was kind of, iffy on that, just because I am such a big fan.
Did you show him your tattoo?
I did not show him my tattoo, although we did talk tattoos. But so I said, that first shot of you sitting in that chair, lean back, in the courtroom, I was like, nailed it. He was like, "Oh, thanks." He seemed very appreciative.
Kind of goes back to what we talked about last week, where he was casting it like Donner cast Superman by getting well-known actors or very well-respected actors in kind of small roles, because you've got like Michael Jai White's in there. Not that Michael Jai White is like a huge star, although he's a fairly more well-known probably now than he ever has been because of his show on Stars. But you've got Tiny Lister in there. You've got William Fichtner in the beginning as the bank manager, who is great.
Isn't he an Academy Award winner?
Well, I don't know. William Fichtner's been in so many movies, and he's so damn good, dude.
But he's really good.
He's great just in his little part.
He gets,
and then, of course, you had Cillian Murphy coming back. How did we say we were pronouncing that?
I guess Killian. I said Cillian, I think, last week. I don't care.
He comes back in a small role as the Scarecrow. But here's one of my favorite bits of casting news on this. Dwight Yoakam was approached for a role as either the bank manager or as one of the corrupt. Like, the dude's got legit chops. But he decided that he turned it down because he wanted to focus on recording his album, Dwight Sings Buck, which is a collection of Dwight Yoakam covering Bucko and songs, and it's a great album. So I'm honestly glad that he did that.
Yeah, but I mean, the songs are already written, so how much focus do you need, Dwight? Come on.
Well, he had to do it justice to his hero.
Yeah, so, I guess that's true.
Speaking of musicians, though, you know who is in the film in a very small role?
Yes, extra. I do.
Prince?
Matt Skiba.
What? Where?
Very, very briefly.
It's literally like he's like an extra. It's in the scene where they're trying to get the crowd's like trying to get someone to come out. The reporter, the guy who is like talking to the cops, who says that he knows who the Batman is, or talking to the reporter saying he knows who the Batman is, and the Joker calls in and they say the first person to kill this guy, whatever.
Yeah, no, actually, now that you're saying that, I swear to God, I think I turned to Jennifer, was like, who
is? And the Joker calls in and they say the first person to kill this guy, whatever.
Yeah, no, actually, now that you're saying that, I swear to God, I think I turned to Jennifer, was like, who is that? Now the person looks familiar.
Yeah, when you've got the crowd outside of the window, Matt Skiba is in that crowd.
Well, good for that guy. That's pretty impressive. Yeah. I thought it was cool. I'd forgotten Cillian Murphy was back in this one, even in that small part. I remember he shows up in Rises
so easily.
Yeah. I just think it's cool because I think he's like the only villain who's just like
returned.
In these movies and like Batman movies. Usually they just get 86th and they're gone. And
well, I like the idea that he gets taken down so easily at the beginning of this movie, because it's almost like Christopher Nolan, when he was developing this movie, he says the theme of this movie is escalation. That kind of fits in with that, because by this point in Batman's career, like, Scarecrow's small fries. He's got bigger fish that he's going to have to developing this movie. He says the theme of this movie is escalation. That kind of fits in with that, because by this point in Batman's career, like Scarecrow's small fries. He's got bigger fish that he's going to have to worry about soon in the Joker. And you have to see that Batman has gotten to the point where this guy who was a threat in the first film is now not a threat at all.
Right.
Before we move on about the making of the film, I want to talk about Heath Ledger.
Why?
Because he's pretty good. I mean,
okay, fine.
Now, his performance is, of course, now universally praised. I mean, it's considered one of the great performances, of all time, I would say. It's like one of those that's people talk about Heath Ledger's role in this like they talk about Marlon Brando and On the Waterfront or James Dean and Rebel Without a Cause,
I don't like how you're going to try to skip right over Christian Bale and how he managed to just come in at the right size this time.
Well, and people were kind of underwhelmed when it was announced. People were not like super into it because, I mean, he had just come off of Brokeback Mountain, great performance and a great film. But he didn't have like this he wasn't a huge star. He wasn't like a Jack Nicholson coming into the role, right? He didn't have this like legendary career prior to coming in. So there wasn't a lot for people to get excited about. He turned in solid performances and good films, but he had not done a ton of films.
I think the general thought amongst everybody was like, really, the guy from 10 Things I Hate About You.
Right.
Okay.
The guy from A Knight's Tale, really?
I was going to say, generally, I think people thought of him as a pretty boy. He had
like a teen idol kind of,
Yeah. He had the role as the handsome son in The Patriot,
Right.
He just seemed like that. I don't know, just that guy.
But there was nothing that was like culturally iconic in his career, like if he had lived, I think the Joker would have been probably known as the role that turned him from like an actor to like a movie star. I think this would have been that star making role. But I do think that him being less of a known entity than someone like Nicholson was actually a blessing in disguise because it allowed Ledger to really disappear into the role of the Joker. Whereas in Nicholson, as much as I love Burton's Batman and love Nicholson, he's playing Jack Nicholson. He is playing a version of himself in that movie.
To be honest, because he's so consistent with the voice and even the tick, the lip licking tick, it helps you forget. I mean, you forget real quick, like, oh yeah, he's Knight's Tale, 10 Things I Hate About You. You forget all about that in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah,
well, because he's fucking gritty and slimy and dirty.
And he's kind of hunched over and he has this lurch to his walk that's almost like a wound.
All about that in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, because he's fucking gritty and slimy and dirty.
And he's kind of hunched over and he has this lurch to his walk that's almost like a wounded animal. Like, it's a really incredible performance. Like it's a fully physical performance.
It's so far away from the pretty boy thing we were just talking about. I mean, he's exactly opposite of that. And just his voice changes, like you said, his whole body, everything about him is different than anything you've ever seen Heath Ledger do before. So it'd be easy to get lost and just forget that this person, I mean, the closest you can even come to recognizing that it's Heath Ledger is probably the cop scene, where he's got the makeup off.
Yeah.
Well, and even as weird as he is, initially, when he gets into that kitchen with those other mob bosses, you see that he's also a force to be reckoned with. You see him take down a guy. So when he gets into that kitchen with those other mob bosses, you see that he's also a force to be reckoned with. You see him take down a guy so fast.
Yeah.
And like there's also like a restrained power, because one of my favorite shots of him is him backing out of the room and then him kicking that door open and just super quick exiting left.
It's great.
And it's such a subtle thing, but like it just goes to show you like he's in complete control of what's happening, and there's this restrained power of this guy who's very unassuming and very easily to dismiss as crazy or whatever. And,
right. I mean, as far as like Jokers go, I mean, that's another thing about this one is like it's like the idea of him being total chaos and anarchy is an illusion in some ways, because he very clearly has
thought it pretty clear from the start that Yeah, I said before, this is not the Joker's story, but this is the Joker's movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the arc, but he's the driving force behind everything that happens in the movie. And Nolan establishes that from the very beginning, because I touched on it last week, but the trilogy as a whole is really about Bruce Wayne's journey. It's about the beginning of Batman, obviously the Batman Begins, to Batman's end. I mean, the trilogy encompasses basically his entire career. I know there are time jumps in between films, but his confrontation with the Joker in this film fundamentally changes the trajectory of that story. Like, this is a turning point in Batman's career. You know, this is a turning point in Bruce Wayne's story.
Well, he even says that in Batman Begins, he doesn't want to be a vigilante. He wants to be a symbol.
Right.
Well, in this movie, he gets the opportunity to make that good of the city, but
yes,
you know,
and you know, Batman Begins starts, the first frames of Batman Begins are of Bruce Wayne, of him in the Himalayas or wherever. This movie starts with the Joker. The first scene is the Joker. It's introducing the Joker to the audience. And now Nolan has called Michael Mann's Heat as a major influence on this film. And I think that's very clear from the opening bank heist, which is a very Michael Mann Heat-esque in execution. The opening scene of this movie is honestly, in my opinion, one of the greatest opening establishing scenes in a movie. It's just, as a set piece by itself, even standing alone from the rest of the movie, it tells a story from beginning to end, you know, that opening sequence. It manages to create a sense of like dread and anticipation before the villain's face is ever even seen, you know? This is probably a good time to know. This is probably a good time to note that the score by Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, I think, goes a long ways in helping establish that feeling.
Even I wanted to make sure we hit on the music this time, because we completely skipped that last time. And Zimmer and James Newton Howard, like, they worked together on Begins and this one, and they were together, like locked in a room making this stuff. And yeah, my God.
I think it's so, and I both of you guys can attest that I'm not the biggest music aficionado, but I thought it was so interesting that they basically, Batman and Joker, they get two notes, but it tells you everything about what's happening there. You got the dun, dun, but then you've got dun, 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 and it's just that it's almost nails on a chalkboard, but it draws you in rather than repulsing you. It's hard for me to explain, but it's so fascinating that they took the same approach to these two very just that it's almost nails on a chalkboard, but it draws you in rather than repulsing you. It's hard for me to explain, but it's so fascinating that they took the same approach to these two very opposite characters.
Well, you only ever hear the Batman theme twice in this movie. Like it just, really? Yeah. And they were going for this, like, they didn't want the heroic theme throughout this. They would like that you'd hum the Batman music or something. Right. They were looking for like more complexity and darkness in like the characters. And so I think Zimmer called it musical foreshadowing. The times that you do hear it, it's just like it's coming, but like, it's just like a little tease that Batman's going to be there. But his goal with this one is intensity. He doesn't want he specifically talks about not wanting a blockbuster style score in this movie, especially when it comes to the Joker. Like, he was experimenting, since we're talking about it. I mean, this guy was experimenting this movie, especially when it comes to the Joker. Like, he was experimenting, since we're talking about it. I mean, this guy was experimenting so much during this time, like Zimmer. I mean, he describes like punk rock, literal like razors on piano wire. He was just going for whatever he could to make this uncomfortable. And Nolan tells the story about actually asking Zimmer at one point, it's like, hey, let me hear what you've got so far. And Nolan gave him a recording, and he said it was like 9,000 bars long of just stuff that Zimmer had put down. And he said he listened to it. It took the entire flight from London to Hong Kong. And he said it was the most maniacal shit he'd ever heard. It was like I said, razors on strings. It was like pencils being cracked on the floor, just mayhem. And he said, for lack of a better word, it was just all unpleasant. And he said he called Zimmer when he lands. It's like,
What a daunting task of like, hey, this character who's more of a force of nature that we have no clue to his origins. Can you sort of sum that up with just music?
And he nails it, because that's the thing with this one.
He does nail it.
This isn't a typical bad guy score. This is uncomfortable. It's anarchy. What I especially love, though, is going back to what brought it up, is like in that scene, especially like where it's focusing in on his back, standing there alone. I mean, the first notes of his score, you should go listen, because it's an incredible score. It's just a cello, and it's this scraping across the cello. It's eerie, and it like pulls you in, and it's like right before it just goes fuck nuts. It's the Joker. And so it's like it's just crazy. I think Zimmer said he literally wanted to write something people would end up hating. But
well, Zimmer has a really interesting way of thinking as a composer, I think. And I think it's, his background, which is not very punk, but it's in that sort of new wave scene. And he produced and played a synthesizer on, I think it was the 4th album by The Damned, the Black Album. So, which is a well-known UK punk band. So he like has his origins in anarchic, kind of background and experimental music.
And it's worth mentioning too, even with Harvey Dent, and listen to his music, it's all like brass and heroic, like American hero stuff at first, but slowly as Two-Face is formed, it's less melodic, it's less brass. It's not bright. It starts to get darker and darker as there's a lot of thought put into this soundtrack, and well worth it. I mean, it's one of like 5 movies that is a purely orchestral soundtrack that has won a Grammy Award for Best Score, I think. Wow. And
I was listening to it today as I was
Grammy for Best Score that wasn't for some reason nominated for an Academy Award for Best Score.
I want to go back real quick to that opening scene, because another thing I think that helps to establish that the Joker as a character is before you ever see the character, before you ever see the Joker and he makes his big reveal, the other criminals that are involved in that heist are talking about him. And they're talking about him like he's not just their boss, but he's this sort of mythical figure almost. Like they kind of, it's kind of how they're like this unknowable figure. None of them seem to have actually met him,
as much of a urban legend as he is a crime.
Right. He's this guy living in the shadows, kind of how people talked about Batman in the first movie.
Right.
And it establishes who the character is, before you've got, that he's manipulative, that he's kind of ruthless in the way that he sets his crew up to kill each other. That he's like, the guy's got a brain on him, but he is evil. And all this before you ever meet him, because you don't really, that he's manipulative, that he's kind of ruthless in the way that he sets his crew up to kill each other. That he's like, the guy's got a brain on him, but he is evil. And all this before you ever meet him, because you don't really meet him, at least not, you don't know it's him until the very end of that scene. And you've got that, the way Nolan shoots it in that amazing close up of Heath Ledger's face is just incredible.
It's fantastic. Yeah. You see these guys like killing each other off as they're working through. You even see the one guy who seems kind of like a badass. I still think it's so funny, like where, William Fichtner's walking through with the shotgun, like firing off shots. And the guy's like, that was 6, right? Or something. And then he stands up and he gets shot. I don't know. I thought that was really cool. Yeah. Oh, and the attention to detail, and I won't go down the whole rabbit hole yet on this part, but just for instance, that shotgun that William Fichtner has right there, Joker has that shotgun for the rest of this movie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was 6, right? Or something. And then he stands up and he gets shot. I don't know. I thought that was really cool. Yeah. Oh, and the attention to detail, and I won't go down the whole rabbit hole yet on this part, but just for instance, that shotgun that William Fichtner has right there, Joker has that shotgun for the rest of this movie.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He hangs on to it.
That's great.
And I just thought that was amazing for some reason.
And here's why I think this, to me, this version of the character is, I think, the best that we've ever seen on film. And it's that he's not only brilliant, he is brilliant, but he does seem to be genuinely unhinged, like genuinely scary and insane, in a way that other versions of the Joker have not, in a way that Jack Nicholson's did not, or God help us, Jared Leto's. He's not motivated by money or power, which is what Nicholson's Joker was motivated by.
Right.
He's not motivated by revenge like Joaquin Phoenix's Joker. Point to what he's doing other than to create utter chaos. If he has a point, if he has a goal, it's to get people to expose their true nature. That's what he seems to be doing throughout most of the film. That's why he eggs Batman on to hit him when Batman's driving the Bat Pod towards him. He's saying, hit me. Like, he wants Batman to hit him. He genuinely wants Batman to like kill or maim him, because then he would prove who Batman really is, what his true nature is.
Yeah.
He knows Batman won't do it, but if he does, then he has proven that Batman's true nature is that he's a killer.
Well, he even
won.
says it when he's hanging upside down. He goes, "You truly are incorruptible."
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking of. I mean, I think if one thing would be that it's like he's out to prove that there is no order, there is no control. Like, everything is just like one domino push away from the whole thing collapsing.
Well, it's why it's what he does throughout the vibe, even if it means murdering hundreds of other people. And then they don't do it, proving him wrong. He was wrong about his assessment of what the society, what the people of Gotham's true nature was. And it eats him up,
Well, it was what Bruce was telling Ra's al Ghul as his house was getting set on fire. Give me more time. There are good people here.
Yeah.
They just all happen to be on that boat.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I mean, one of the parts I loved that I noticed this time watching it through too is like referencing back to Ra's al Ghul. Bruce loses himself a little bit in this pursuit, and then Alfred's the one trying to explain this to him, that you're not going to find a motive, you're not going to find the reason this is happening. And he tells him that story about, I think it was like in Burma or whatever, that they had to, it's like, did you ever find him? We set the whole village on fire or something like that, or we set the whole forest on fire. But he's like saying, that thing that some people just want to watch, those aren't complicated, Alfred. It's he says something, it is an exact quote from Ra's al Ghul from Batman Begins.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was,
I don't think I ever
cool.
realized that.
Yeah.
Well, because I mean, you see Alfred do it, because as Alfred's talking to him, he starts looking at the screens, and Alfred has to sort of get in front of him and just go, look, criminals aren't complicated. This isn't a criminal. This is something else.
Yeah. So back to the making of the film for a few minutes, but just as he had done on Batman Begins, Nolan shot this film on location as much as possible. This time, a large portion. I mean, he shot a little bit in Chicago in Batman Begins, but he shot a good chunk of it, 13 weeks, I think, in Chicago this time around, because he had what he called a truly remarkable experience when he shot Batman Begins there. One of my favorite little tidbits from the filming is that when, a lot of times movies will shoot under fake names, like Blue Harvest, like Star Wars or Empire, I think it was, shooting under Blue Harvest.
Yeah.
In Chicago, they shot this in Chicago this time around because he had what he called a truly remarkable experience when he shot Batman Begins there. One of my favorite little tidbits from the filming is that when, a lot of times movies will shoot under fake names, like Blue Harvest, like Star Wars or Empire, I think it was, shooting under Blue Harvest. Yeah. In Chicago, they shot this movie under a fake title called Rory's First Kiss, and which is not a Gilmore Girls prequel.
I was hoping, but no. It's Nolan's son is Rory.
Oh, his son's name is Rory?
His son's name is Rory.
How about that? Weird for your dad to name your movie after your first kiss.
Right.
And for it to be fake, there's a lot of things we could read into it about that.
And it didn't trick anybody. Like, everyone in Chicago knew this was Batman Begins. It was hundreds of millions of dollars in production with like thousands of jobs created in the city. They knew what they were doing
about that.
And it didn't trick anybody. Like, everyone in Chicago knew this was Batman Begins. It was hundreds of millions of dollars in production with like thousands of jobs created in the city. They knew what they were doing. It's not like you can get everyone to shut up.
It's interesting. You mentioned Heat earlier, and actually now that I'm thinking about it, this supposedly started off with the same deal as, like, I think I mentioned it in Batman Begins. I don't know if this is the thing that Nolan does on every movie. As we learn more about him, we'll find out. But the first 4 days of shooting was no film rolled. It was Nolan screening movies, 2 movies per day for the cast and crew. And the movies they showed were Heat, Cat People from 1942, Citizen Kane, King Kong, Batman Begins, Black Sunday,
Showed his own
Clockwork
movie.
Orange, and Stalag 17.
Wow.
It's a great bunch of movies. I can see a lot of that. King Kong, I'm not sure, but
I would be interested to ask
Unstoppable
him.
Force.
I'll call
Sure.
him and see what he says.
Call old Chris.
I will say too, another fun story about Chicago is that while they were filming there, like concurrently, or I think that's the right word, right next to their shooting, Wanted was being shot, that other comic book movie, and Morgan Freeman's in both, so he was working on both at the same time.
Wow.
Yeah, and so this will be fun for comic book nerds.
Lucius Fox starts talking about the Joker as this motherfucker.
Well, Mark Millar, who wrote Wanted, slowly figured out that Batman was happening. I don't know if it was through Morgan directly or whatever, but he snuck his way on set for the Batman movie. And he was found sitting on the Batmobile at one point, and security had to escort him out. But
It sounds like something Mark Millar would do, honestly.
Yes, it does. Oh my God.
So unlike in Batman Begins, Nolan didn't really try to hide the identity of the city this time around. You can see visible Chicago landmarks. You can see the Sears Tower and Navy Pier. Like, it's clearly Chicago in this one. They used an abandoned Brock's candy factory for the Gotham General Hospital, the one that the Joker blows up. Mm-hmm. And its demolition actually prompted some people to call the police because they thought that there was a terror attack happening.
It's always a good sign.
Yeah. So for scenes that needed to be filmed in a studio, Pinewood Studios near London was served as the primary shooting location. Pinewood, of course, legendary studio where a lot of James Bond was shot, Star Wars, like it's a major studio in London, one of the biggest in the world. Similarly to what happened in Chicago, at one point while they're filming in London, this is not in Pinewood, but at the Battersea Power Station, just outside of London, they had to, and local residents there also called the authorities thinking that terrorists were attacking the power station. You should tell people if you're going to blow shit up near
It
their
really
house.
feels that way. It does.
Really
I even saw like when they were
put a note on a door.
If you see something, say something.
I mean, that's what they're doing.
I saw something about too, like, I mean, this is jumping ahead, but like even when they're doing like promotional stuff, they were sending out cakes with like cell phones inside that would like make them vibrate. There were wires coming out of, and they would send them to like newspapers and stuff. And so like one like
poor decision. What a terrible decision.
Like one building was evacuated.
Oh my God.
Just insane. There's like cakes from the Joker.
So for the scenes where Batman chases Lau to Hong Kong, the crew, as Nolan likes to do, likes to shoot on location. If he's setting a scene in Hong Kong, guess what? We're taking the whole crew to Hong Kong. And that's what they did. But that was apparently, according to Wally Pfister and several other crew members, it was a nightmare. They clashed with like
one building was evacuated.
Oh my God.
Just insane. There's like cakes from the Joker.
So for the scenes where Batman chases Lau to Hong Kong, the crew, as Nolan likes to do, likes to shoot on location. If he's setting a scene in Hong Kong, guess what? We're taking the whole crew to Hong Kong. And that's what they did. But that was apparently, according to Wally Pfister and several other crew members, it was a nightmare. They clashed with like city officials in Hong Kong. They would complain about the noise of like the helicopters and all this stuff. In fact, it was such a pain in the ass that like the scene where Batman jumps from the skyscraper, that was supposed to be a practical stunt. And they ended up having to do it digitally because the local officials in Hong Kong were being such a pain in the ass.
Jeez.
Well, point one, I think this is the first movie where we've ever seen Batman operate outside of Gotham. So that was kind of cool.
Jeez.
Well, point one, I think this is the first movie where we've ever seen Batman operate outside of Gotham. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Like
very
cool.
travel. You can see his, because obviously in the comics that happens. I mean, around this time, in the comics, I think Grant Morrison was working on the comics around the mid 2000s, and his shit, Batman battles aliens and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want to get it twisted, by the way, like that stunt, Paul Jennings, the stunt coordinator, I mean, he made this happen. Like they had prepped for this. It's nuts. Like they had to tether a guy to a helicopter. So that's why there was helicopter activity. I think I saw the stuntman was Buster Reeves, and he did.
It's pronounced Rhymes.
Is it Rhymes?
Busta Rhymes.
Busta Rhymes. Yeah, that's who it was. Yeah. It was so it's a fast talker, so it's hard to pick up on what he's saying. But no, he actually did the fucking jump. I mean, the trick part is like swinging out, but now he's a pendulum, so he's coming back with momentum. So that's where the helicopter comes into play, because as he goes out and he starts to come back, the helicopter takes off away from the building so that when he swings back, he doesn't grossly smash against the side of the building.
Wow.
But yeah, unfortunately, the Chinese government, they didn't want all this helicopter activity over the city. So they ultimately did. Government. What's that?
The Hong Kong government.
Yeah, true.
They're a separate entity.
That is correct. So yeah, thank you for specifying. We don't want any trouble. The jump though, they did ultimately really do the jump in a green screened like room. Like it was 120-foot drop this dude did, like tethered, and just the dive part of it, like into like just nothingness, with the green screen. So it's still sort of real.
Yeah.
And that is Christian Bale, by the way. Everybody was impressed that is him standing on.
Yeah.
Was he strapped in? Surely he was tethered somehow.
You'd think he would have to.
They might have CGI'd the lines out that were tethering him to the building or something.
Yeah.
They're not just gonna. The insurance company's not.
I was about to say the insurance company would lose their shit.
He seemed to have a lot of I saw interviews with the stuntmen who were just like, no, that was him. He just like insisted.
Yeah, he insisted a lot.
Like, he's fearless. He just wants to walk out on that ledge.
Nolan also famously filmed several key sequences in The Dark Knight in the IMAX format, which made the film the first feature to use that format. The scenes that he shot, I think there are 4 total, but that includes like the opening bank robbery and the car chase that comes halfway through the film. And if you saw this movie in theaters, and I cannot remember if it does this on home video, I didn't pay attention to it, but the aspect ratio actually does change.
It does. I noticed this when I was watching it.
Okay, it does it on home video. I couldn't remember. I watched it a few days ago, but I didn't think to pay attention. Format, it's closer to a square, so you can actually see the aspect ratio change when those scenes come around. It's pretty incredible. And of course you don't get the same effect seeing it at home, obviously, as you do in the theater, but Christopher Nolan is a big proponent for the theatrical experience, much to his detriment in the year of 2020. But he wants you to see a movie in a theater. He wants you to see it in the best possible format, and shooting on an IMAX frame of film is enormous if you compare it to like a typical 35 millimeter or even a 70 millimeter. It's bigger than. So you get just a level of detail that is unmatched in any other format. And Nolan actually edited the original film element of the IMAX on this because he knew that if he had scanned it and edited it, then he would actually lose resolution. So he wanted to edit it on this because he knew that if he had scanned it and edited it, then he would actually lose resolution. So he wanted to edit it in the original piece of film, which is commitment, man. That's commitment. And the reason that films don't usually shoot in IMAX is because it's a really tough format to shoot in. Yeah. They're much larger, much heavier than standard cameras.
Oh yeah,
don't hold as much film, so you can't shoot for as long. And
it's like a standard 35 millimeter goes vertically, like what you picture like a projector doing, like with the spinning wheel. But like IMAX is horizontal.
Yes.
Like these slides or the film is so much bigger. Like on it, it's just it's kind of impressive. But that's what makes the cameras so much larger, also, and heavier.
And they're also super noisy, so it makes it really difficult to record dialogue when you're using it.
Well, when it works. Incredible resolution.
Because I don't know how you guys watched it. You probably have a digital code, but I actually put the Blu-ray disc in the
to record dialogue when you're using it.
Well,
when it works. Incredible resolution.
Because I don't know how you guys watched it. You probably have a digital code, but I actually put the Blu-ray disc in the player and just fired it up, and God, it looks so good. Like it's one of those people probably don't think it makes a difference, but I think it's really the difference that makes it. Because I mean those visuals and just the attention to detail.
It's a gorgeous looking film.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
That's one of my favorite parts about it this time is just these wide city shots and like
those like sweeping shots of the city that he does. And he does
like
that
up until this
most of his films.
Yeah, and I mean up until this point, it's worth mentioning. I mean, you're talking about Nolan in the theatrical experience. I mean, all you'd ever seen IMAX used for up till this is like fucking two penguins hanging out on a beach or some shit.
Yeah, I mean, I used to watch them. I used to go traveling a lot when I was a kid, and I remember going to like the Grand Canyon and the IMAX theater there, and it's a IMAX movie about the Grand Canyon. I saw one in San Antonio, and I saw one about the Alamo, and it's nature documentaries. Basically.
Nobody had ever thought about it before this point about using it as a dramatic tool as opposed to like documentary stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there had been other movies that had been converted to IMAX format prior to this, because I know a couple Disney movies, Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King, Star Wars Attack of the Clones had been released in the IMAX format. But even then, those at the time, an IMAX projector could not run and film past about 90 minutes. So like when I saw Attack of the Clones on IMAX, and they had to cut out a bunch of shit. They had to like edit it. It was actually better because they edited all this dumb shit between Padme and Anakin, all that love story shit that's right in the middle of the film that just is terrible. They cut all that out. It's the best version of that movie that I've ever seen.
They should release epic. It's going to have action like nobody's ever seen before. And if you want the most bang for your buck, I think I can make that happen with these cameras. And it's going to bring the audience like into the action. Like we're talking about, it's not a simple process either. I mean, the film crew, I think, had to do like at least a week of IMAX school to see if they could learn how to manage the cameras and move like they normally would with the 35 millimeter. I mean, you kind of hinted on this, like, for instance, everything about your focus is totally different. On one hand, like the focus is more shallow than a normal film. Because it brings like the image in so much. I think you've got like inches to work with instead.
Yeah, it's a very, very short depth of field.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like you said too, the screen on an IMAX is like 8 stories high. So the audience focus is entirely different because you can't just take that whole screen in. So it's
on a true IMAX, the seating is very, very steep. So every seat is very close to the screen, and the screen literally takes up your entire field of vision. No matter where in the theater you're sitting, you cannot like just look. You're having to look around. You're having to move your head and like look around at the screen to focus on different parts of it. So when you see like a sweeping shot, like the car chase or something, it's a very different experience.
Yeah. So one of the things, I mean, you notice, like, especially like in that bank scene, for instance, instead of a center focused image, like the top of the screen is a lot more background stuff because your eyes don't focus above what's going on in the screen, So it's weird how they like had to angle this.
They had to frame things a little differently. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the words I'm looking for. So, and that's one of the things Nolan loved, though. Like he said, so it's weird how they like had to angle this.
They had to frame things a little differently. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the words I'm looking for. So and that's one of the things Nolan loved, though. Like he said that especially for the Joker, he said it was like a laser beam to Ledger's eyes. So again, Nolan with
loves the eyes,
fapping to eyeballs.
They're gonna raid his house one day and just find jars of eyes in his basement.
And you mentioned this too, by the way, too, the issue of how damn heavy the things are. A 35 millimeter camera is like something like, I mean, like literally, I think it's like about 35 pounds. And then when you're talking about Steadicam stuff, you have to think like a Steadicam's like part of this apparatus that's like leveraged away from your body. So it's so much more heavy. Yeah. I saw people talk about that like means that really that camera weighs like 80 something pounds when you're carrying it. With an IMAX camera, it's like over 100 pounds you're carrying the whole time. And I guess this is I saw people talk about that like means that really that camera weighs like 80 something pounds when you're carrying it. With an IMAX camera, it's like over 100 pounds you're carrying the whole time. And I guess this is probably a good point to mention too, that at this time, there were only 4 of these things in existence. Building them took forever. Yeah. And these guys, they broke one. So it was during the armored car chase. They had them like side mounted on 18 wheelers. The Ultimate Arm that I think I mentioned it last week. They had it beefed up. and they had one on a car there. And anyway, as things go, they crushed one.
They crashed it.
Whoops. And
Totally worth.
Well, as long as we're talking about the
Totally
car
worth it for
chase,
the end product.
one of the new additions in this film, design-wise, is the Bat Pod, which is on, I guess, the Bat Cycle, the Batman's motorcycle. Nathan Crowley, the production designer who also designed the Tumbler in Batman Begins, designed this, and he designed 6 models to be used in the film. And it is remarkably not a visual effect. It is a working vehicle.
Yeah,
the Bat Pod.
Yep.
It has these huge 20-inch tires on it, and the engine of this thing is in the hubs of the wheels. Yeah. And you're basically, the rider is lying down on top of the gas tank. Christian Bale like he did with the previous stunt we were talking about, tried to insist on doing the shots of Batman on the Bat Pod himself, but the stunt team was like, hell no, we can barely ride this thing. You are going to kill yourself.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a stuntman, Jean-Pierre Goyer. He doubled for Christian Bale during those scenes on the Bat Pod, and he was the only one who could balance the bike. Nearly unlearn how to ride a motorcycle to manage the riding the thing, because you steer with your shoulders in this thing. Mm-hmm. Like you see Batman's hands are in these like inserts. He's like where he can like control the guns and stuff. So your arms are actually in those, and you're kind of controlling it with your shoulders like this. It's insane. What an insane piece of engineering.
Because even just when he's going through sections of buildings where you can see it's polished tile.
Yeah.
And just knowing how slick that is to begin with. And he's having to tip this thing up on its edge to get around certain things. And watching that this time around, I was just like, "Oh my!"
That's what I love.
Forever.
I'm happy when we can mention the stunt guys, because I definitely had Goy down to mention, because that's incredible. I was actually going to lead into that, saying like that chase is well. I was actually going to lead into that, saying like that chase is, I think it's like Lower Wacker is where it's at, and like Nolan had loved filming there in Batman Begins. So like that's why they went back. And God bless him, he wants to do everything practical, but he couldn't do the Batmobile crashing into the garbage truck properly. So those were like 1/3 models. Which is
still more practical than just doing it CGI.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. I would like to have that Batmobile personally, or even the garbage truck, just a 1/3 size garbage truck in the backyard. But it was the first time they crashed.
The thing I love about the Christopher Nolan's movies and these Batman movies specifically, since that's what we're talking about, is his love of just movie magic. Like not like he uses CGI, but he uses it sparingly and as needed. But
the way you're supposed to.
Yeah, but he's going to do it that way. Like he wants to do everything. He wants to shoot on film, and he wants to do practical stunts, and he wants to do real working vehicles, and he wants to crash real fucking cars. I think that's cool.
Yeah, no, it is cool. Yeah. And he seems to have an appreciation for cars. I think you get that with the Lambo that he drives later and stuff too. But they in one interview I saw, he described like he was gonna destroy the Batmobile in Batman Begins, like it was going to blow up, but they backed off that because they were like, no, it's like a part of the family. It's become a character now. Like we can't destroy it. But I think maybe the Bat Pod helped ease that pain this time, like a phoenix rising out of the ashes. We get the Bat Pod so we can destroy the Batmobile.
That ejection moment is so good too.
Yeah, it's so cool looking. Just the way that it attaches the tires on and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just fucking cool. One of the things too is you could see how excited in some of the stuff I watch that they get, because
good too.
Yeah, it's so cool looking. Just the way that it attaches the tires on and stuff.
Yeah,
it's just fucking cool. One of the things too is you could see how excited in some of the stuff I watch that they get, because they had designed the bat suit with a this backpack thing that like the cape was going to go up inside the backpack, because they were like sure that you can't ride the Bat Pod with the cape because it's going to get caught up in the wheel.
Yeah, we've all seen The Incredibles.
No kicks.
Yeah, there you go. But they said the first ride out, Goy like drove it out, had the cape flowing, and it just flapped and stayed in the air. And it just
cool.
And they were like, that looks so fucking cool. Like,
and it kind of looks like bat wings. It's kind of like,
yeah.
And so I just thought that was kind of neat.
One of the things that they definitely had to use CGI on, because the other option was to set Aaron Eckhart on the creation
Aaron,
of
look over
Two-Face.
here.
The guys who did the special effects actually did complain about having to do the CGI fire on his face when he's on fire, because they're like, things don't just burn halfway. Like half of something doesn't burn. Something catches on fire, the whole thing burns. So they had a hard time actually figuring out how to make that look right. But of course, to do his Two-Face, the effect on his face, they had to go digital because they couldn't have used prosthetics. Nolan didn't want to use prosthetics because prosthetics inherently add to the face instead of taking away from the face, which is what happens when you get burned. So Eckhart on set wore like digital markers on his face, and a prosthetic skull cap over half of his head. And then they digitally overlaid the Two-Face, the burnt face. And that was done by a British effects company called Frame Store. And it's not like 100% medically accurate because they admit that they muscles and bones and things to make it look cooler, and they actually said that they went a little more realistic at times. Like at first they tried some versions of it that were a little more realistic looking, but they said it was just too much to do it that way. So they actually went even though you could look at this and say this is the most realistic version of Two-Face that's ever existed, it's actually not that realistic at all, medically speaking. But
it's so cool to see that eyeball moving.
Oh, like, dude, you think he has to use eye drops like all the time?
Yeah.
No eyelid.
That would suck. But even though it's digital, that's some good looking digital work.
It's great work. It's really great work. And it's
fantastic.
This movie's 12 years old now, and it's aged incredibly well.
I thought it looked like that looks like a legit chicken wing. I just want to bite his face. That's ultimately like looks like a legit chicken wing. I just want to bite his face. That's ultimately like the person he doesn't want to run up against.
No,
like, you look grilled to perfection.
Crispy.
Just extra crispy Two-Face face. Oh my god.
So the Dark Knight opens
original recipe.
The Dark Knight opens on July 18th, 2008. Of course, opened to overwhelmingly positive reviews, record-breaking box office numbers, pulled in over $1 billion at the global box office in 2008. In the U.S., it was the highest-grossing film of the entire year, and it has pretty much ever since its release been considered one of the best films of the 2000s and one of the best superhero movies of all time. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars in his review and said that it redefined the possibilities of the comic book movie. It was nominated for 8 Academy, gave it 4 stars in his review and said that it redefined the possibilities of the comic book movie. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, won 2 of those, one for Best Sound Editing and, of course, Best Supporting Actor for Heath Ledger, which was, as we all know, kind of a bittersweet award. It was posthumous. It was a few months after he finished filming The Dark Knight, while the film was in its post-production stage in January of 2008. Heath Ledger passed away from an accidental overdose of medications, and this movie is sort of Heath Ledger's legacy. I mean, this is the role that he will forever be associated with. And it's a shame that we didn't get to see what else he had in him because he's so fucking good in this movie.
Yeah.
Man, when you just like turn him loose. Yeah. I mean, you're saying all that. I mean, this is the first comic book movie, like where Batman had proven something in like 89. This is the first comic book movie to reach I think that 1 billion mark and 89. So this was like the next stage in comic book movies. It felt like, even in China, who just, Hong Kong, who wanted to give them all kinds of shit. I think they banned this movie, and it ended up being one of the most bootlegged movies in the whole entire country or something. And, but, and Heath Ledger, like you mentioned, I mean, he posthumously won like 32 Best Actor in a Supporting Role awards for his work. He won what they call the quintuple, the Oscar, Golden Globe, BAFTA, SAG, and Critics' Choice Award.
Wow.
Just all of that stuff.
I don't know how you guys feel about it, but when there's that one scene where he's hanging upside down, sort of having the last back and forth between him and Batman, and he says, "I think you and I are destined to do this forever." I still get chills.
I loved that
because that is how we will always remember him.
Yeah.
The role of the Joker really did this. This is what the Joker does to you. It just takes you to these dark places and that sort of thing. But I read a bunch of stuff from his family who says that Ledger suffered from insomnia his whole life. That was a big problem that he had, and he was often mixing sleeping pills together with other prescription drugs he had gotten. His sister said that she had literally talked to him the night before about how he needed to chill with that. Like he had to stop doing that because it was dangerous.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, the one night in 2008, he took a mix and that was a fatal combination. And it's what killed him. But everybody you ask about Heath Ledger during this time, in role, yeah, he was the Joker and he was wild and stuff like that. But I saw Michael Jai White on a podcast talking about the atmosphere of that set. But I saw Michael Jai White on a podcast talking about the atmosphere of that set was relaxed and cool. And Heath Ledger was so chill, and he was one of the best co-actors he's ever worked with. And he looked like he was just having so much fun doing this movie. It was not like some deep, dark.
It wasn't like he was being haunted by being the Joker. He was taking medications for a variety of ailments, including, like Gary said, insomnia. He did have oxy in his system, but oxy can be prescribed legally as much as people do abuse it. And he had anxiety medication that he was taking, and it was just a lethal combo that unfortunately took his life.
Yeah, it'll I mean, that stuff's meant to sort of bring you down, all of those things bring you down, all of those things that you were that we just listed off, they're all quote unquote downers.
Yeah.
Take enough of them, your heart shuts off. That's what happens.
That's sadly, that's it, man. That's what happened to the dude. There's just no tricks to that. It's just, and probably the oxy. I don't even think I realized the oxy was in there, but I mean, in my real life job, I mean, I deal with that kind of stuff all the time. And that's just not directly, but anyway, my point is that is a huge issue in the world today. That is nationwide, and we've lost a ton of people, a ton of talent to that exact kind of thing.
Especially recently, even in the years since Ledger's death. So Batman Begins was unlike any movie that had come before it. Any other any other superhero movie that had come before it. Superhero movie.
Right.
This version of Batman operates like a public servant more than a superhero.
Yeah.
I mentioned last week how even though Batman Begins was always touted as this, this newfangled grounded approach to Batman, it still had some kind of goofy comic book elements, the Batman controlling bats and the Scarecrow's hallucinogens. None of that's present here. The closest comic booky thing is maybe the sonar tech, but this one doesn't really have that kind of stuff. And unlike so many other superhero movies, there are no world-ending stakes. Batman's not trying to save the world. He's trying to. There are no shared universe connections. This is a crime thriller.
Yeah,
disguised in a cape and cowl.
Yeah,
this is about Batman just trying to save his city. I watched a really great. Disguised in a cape and cowl.
Yeah.
This is about Batman just trying to save his city. I watched a really great YouTube video. I'll try to remember to link it. There's a great YouTube channel called Lessons from the Screenplay. This guy, he analyzes screenwriting. He's really, really good. And he talks about what makes a great antagonist. and specifically in regards to The Dark Knight, what makes the Joker such a great antagonist to Batman's protagonist. And it's not that they're polar opposites. In screenwriting and storytelling, often the protagonist and the antagonist are after the same goal, right? The beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Belloc and Indy are both after the same thing. They're both going after the Ark of the Covenant, right? They're just going about it their own ways.
Right.
One's more nefarious in his practice.
Yep.
Batman's obviously trying to save it. The Joker's trying to sort of unmask it. Like that kind of goes back to what I said before about how
strip it raw.
He's trying to show people's true nature. And that's what they're fighting over. But it's not the end of the world. This is not Infinity War. And I've talked about this on the show before, or at least on the old show, that I think that makes the stakes more personal. Because as wild as some of the events of this film are, the idea of a boat of people blowing up is much more believable than Thanos snapping his finger. And we can relate to that a little bit more because we have seen terrorist attacks where a boat or a building blows up. That's something we can relate to as human beings, more so than something that the Infinity as human beings, more so than something that the Infinity Gauntlet.
Right.
So we connect with it a little bit more. It's less spectacle maybe, but it's more personal. It's more human based.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When and not to take anything away from an Infinity War or Endgame, those are great movies,
those movies. But different goals.
When Scott Lang is running through the pillars with all the names on it, it doesn't really hit home until he finds the name that means something to him.
Yes.
When we go into these boats, and I'll say both boats, we actually get a glimpse of these people who are staring down the barrel of these barrels, and it brings this is it. These are the people that we're going to lose. We got a mother, we got a business guy, we got all these people, and it just this is it. These are the people that we're going to lose. We got a mother, we got a business guy, we got all these people, and it just, they could be your next door neighbor. It's not just
could be your friend Tiny Lister.
Tiny Lister. Absolutely.
I do appreciate that it was him that was finally like, I'm going to do something you should have done at the beginning of this, and throws the remote out. At least they gave him that thing. I wish I had, as I was watching it, I was like, I want to have this much faith in people.
Yeah,
I do.
Tough. It's tough. And honestly, like when you watch this compared to more other recent comic book movies, if like watching it this time, I was like, for a comic book movie, there's relatively little action. Like there aren't a lot of action scenes. There's a couple. There's the car chase, I guess, is the biggest one, but most of the other even set pieces, like the heist at the beginning, that's not an action scene. It's a very well done heist, but it's not a lot of action to it. There aren't a lot of car chases. There's one car chase.
I think exactly you get Batman like trying to bust through the building to take out the Joker's people, like right before the boat thing. That's
but if you compare it to something like the Marvel movies that is like nonstop action, this is it's a very different feel.
I think it's carried by performances completely. Like
it is. It's a character piece.
I mean, like for me, the one thing that stood out, and I think it did before, and I haven't seen this movie in a while, and Joker in the fundraiser, like actually that whole scene, like even from Bruce talking about Dent all the way up until the Joker showing up, and like that whole thing, that's one of my favorite parts this time around. Was I just thought all of that was just so amazing. I don't know. It was just so intense the whole time. It was just so good.
No, I agree. If there's one thing that I would to be a damsel in distress, the entire film, and Nolan, like he doesn't write women well. Women are his movies are about dudes. I mean, Dunkirk doesn't have a single woman in the entire movie. He does not write women well. They're always sort of an object. They're very, when they appear at all, they're hardly characters at all. The biggest character, female character he's probably written has probably been maybe the wife from The Prestige.
I was just thinking The Prestige.
I mean, even you've got what's her name?
There's the
Carrie-Anne
daughter in
Moss.
Interstellar.
Yeah, the daughter in Interstellar, I think, is pretty good. Actually, rewatching that one recently, I was impressed by that relationship. But he typically doesn't write a lot of strong females.
Yeah.
And in the case of this movie, I mean, I really think she just doesn't have a lot to do other than being
Stand out to me.
It's a little.
It was a lot this time for some reason.
Much, especially when he's talking to Lucius when they're in that room. But this is the only time I think that Lucius and Batman talk as Batman and not as Bruce Wayne. When they're in the room with all the screens, they're talking, and he's still talking to him in that growl. Like, Lucius knows who you are. You don't have to do that.
Cool it. But he does it. He does it too when he goes and takes out Dent. Like when he comes behind him and puts him to sleep when Rachel is there. He immediately, like, as he puts him to sleep, like, he switches like to that voice. So you could say that's like, maybe that's a psychological choice or something. I do appreciate there's so many things I was thinking about with this movie, but since we're talking about Batman real quick, the suit, I loved that legitimately all the reasons that they had for changing the suit, they're legit. Talking about Batman real quick, the suit, I loved that legitimately all the reasons that they had for changing the suit, they're legit. It was
function over fashion.
Yeah. They decided to upgrade because they were focusing in on this, like, being a suit of armor as opposed to like the rubber suit, because they wanted to be able to make upgrades. And it's crazy to me to think about, because they didn't know about Iron Man at this time. So it was just kind of cool. Like, this is before MCU was clicking. This was influential.
It's the same summer
stuff.
as Iron Man.
Yeah, it's the same summer as Iron Man, but just them trying to keep it grounded and for it to make sense. They wanted this suit to be flexible, faster. The old suit was like too much weight to be carried around, and they stuck those reasons in the movie as the legit reasons that Bruce would change it. It's all the real deal. And the old suit was like too much weight to be carried around, and they stuck those reasons in the movie as the legit reasons that Bruce would change it. It's all the real deal. And they finally nailed down him being able to turn his fucking head
by giving him basically a bat helmet instead of just a regular cowl.
Right. They created like a separate neck piece. Yeah. He has a helmet that goes over. So it's super functional.
He doesn't have to rip the rubber like Michael Keaton did.
Right. Oh my God. Yeah. I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I saw like somebody point out that, when he talks about the dogs, there's a cool YouTube channel, since we're throwing props out. There's one guy called the Canadian Lad who has a YouTube channel, and he watches every movie in 0.25 speed to see like what he notices.
Every movie?
I mean, every movie he covers in that channel. So
props to you, but
he went over like the scars from the dog bite, carrying over from scene to scene and stuff like that. But I think it was him that pointed out that, like, even there's the scene where like Bruce and Lucius are talking about the suit and the armor, and he's like, "Will it work against the dog?" And he's just like, running into a lot of dogs on your mountain trips or something like that. And he says he was speculating that Lucius does say like it should work against cats. That like he was speculating against the time that old Michelle Pfeiffer like stuck the claw.
Stuck her claws in.
Yeah. I just thought that was neat. There is a weird thing, by the way, because I also those everything wrong with people. I watched their video on everything
I hate
great.
those videos.
Well, they do like the everything great about this movie. And so I try to watch those sometimes. And one of the things they pointed out is that dog thing. That's the issue with the dog at the very beginning, or the dogs. And then
Joker gets a mad dog.
Yeah, like Joker's at one point riding in the car, like sticking his head out the window like a dog. And he says to Gordon, like, or I forget who it was, maybe it was Dent or whoever it was. He's just like, I'm just a dog chasing cars. Like, I wouldn't even know what to do if I got one. And it just, I don't know. It was just weird. And then by the end, Joker actually has the dogs with him.
Yeah.
Like there's like, I don't know, just kind of interesting little side note. I also, by the way, since I'm doing this, I'm sorry to keep carrying on, but there was another YouTube video that I watched was like freaking amazing. These guys called the Film Theorists, and they take like some point in a movie and really just drive it into the ground. And it is crazy. They take the stack of money that the Joker sets on fire, and the video is like his jokingly analyze that pyramid of bills, and then come up with, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, watch the video, but they come up with that is literally like $4.686 billion in that stack is what it would have to be. There would be like 468,000 straps of what they're assuming is $100 bills, based on what they saw in the bank vault earlier in the video. And, but they say that that's not even insane, because in 2008, they look up this thing and the mob was supposedly have been moving 50 to 90 billion per year. And so they were like, that's why everybody laughs or something when Lau talks about like, or nobody gets like crazy about Lau talking about the 68 million he stole. They're like, that's chump change to these guys. They're like, that's not even a huge thing. So that Joker just apparently just probably has like stacks of cash somewhere. Like just Lau talking about the 68 million he stole. They're like, that's chump change to these guys. They're like, that's not even a huge thing. So that Joker just apparently just probably has like stacks of cash somewhere, like just built in the billions.
Well, with the way that his goons at the very beginning were talking about him, it sounds like he's been in operation for a while.
Yeah, well, we saw his calling card at the end of Batman Begins.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know how much time has passed between the two. I'm not sure. I know between this one and the next one, it's like 10 years, but it has.
Well, I think he said, well, I mean, Joker says, let's wind the clocks back a year.
Okay.
So you can guess, 12 to 18 months, maybe.
Gotcha.
It's fun. It's all like speculation, but it's just fun to look at that stuff sometimes too. Like, just even that, going back to the Joker's character, just like how in control he is, although he's like trying to portray like, I'm crazy, I'll burn a bunch of cash and stuff like that.
He clearly knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Operate like every single gun. Like he just seems proficient.
Makes triggers and things with from the close-ups you can see there's not a lot going on there, so he's able to put some stuff together.
There's even I think there's even a segment, it's when he's talking to Harvey, like he's telling, like he's like, what's funny, and he's like telling him these stories, but one of the stories is truck full of troops are in this situation, and
this may come from Patton Oswalt's theory that he put on Facebook a few years ago. Have you heard that?
Oh, I don't think so.
So Patton Oswalt, everyone's favorite nerd. This was like, oh man, when was this? It was around the 10th anniversary. So about 2 years ago, probably. Patton Oswalt, I've actually got his quote here. He starts talking about, it's a pretty lengthy post, but I'll just read a little bit of it. His basic theory is that the Joker is a war vet suffering from PTSD. He says, I just watched The Dark Knight, and another wrinkle came to mind about the Joker. What if he's not only ex-military, but ex-military intelligence, specifically interrogation? He says he seems to be very good at the kind of mindfuckery that sustained professional interrogation requires. His boast about how I know the squealers when he sees one, the way he adjusts his personality and methods depending on who he's talking to and knowing exactly the reaction he'll get, mocking Gamble's manhood, invoking terror to Bryant, the false Batman, teasing the policeman's sense of loyalty to his fallen fellow cops, digging into Gordon's isolation, appealing to Harvey Dent's hunger for fairness. He even conducts a reverse interrogation with Batman when he's in the box at the police station, wanting to see how far Batman will go, trying to make him break his one rule.
Yeah, and that's insane, but it really feels that way with, besides all this stuff, like, I mean, yeah, just how in control he feels the entire time. Yeah, and that's insane, but it really feels that way with, besides all this stuff, like, I mean, yeah, just how in control he feels the entire time.
He's manipulative.
Yeah, completely manipulative. And I thought one thing in the thing was funny too, is it's ironic for the point I'm about to make, is that every time he tells a joke, nobody laughs, but when he says something that he's very serious about, a lot of people laugh. Like in that mob scene was very cool. Like when he says like, like, oh, you're gonna hire me to kill the bat or something like that everybody laughs. But like, he's just like, I don't know. It's just weird. It's like his humor is completely off from them. The other thing that triggered me about the Joker this time, I don't know why, but this stood out to me, is when Batman's like punching the shit out of him in the interrogation room and the Joker's just laughing harder. Is there anything scarier than that? Am I the only one who has those dreams? Stood out to me is when Batman's like punching the shit out of him in the interrogation room and the Joker's just laughing harder. Is there anything scarier than that? Am I the only one who has those dreams sometimes where like you're in a fight with somebody and you cannot hit them hard?
Yeah.
Like you're just like punching and nothing's happening. And it reminded me of that. And I'm like, that's got to be so goddamn frustrating.
Yes.
Yeah. That's one of the things.
That's him trying to break the Batman,
Yeah. I've throughout my martial arts career, there's enough guys who do some mind games during matches, and it screws with you and pisses you off. And I've done it. I've been able to do it a couple times myself, and it's so satisfying in terms of, kind of getting some sick pleasure out of it. But one of those ones is just being the guy who you just can't hit, or when you get hit, it doesn't fade his exit. But shortly before that, it's subtle and it's quick. And in comparison to the rest of the scene is almost a throwaway line, but you hear someone go, "You're crazy."
I'm not.
And just him just, "No, I'm not.
No, I'm not."
He gets very upset.
It's "No, I'm not." And it's I still get and the look, and again the eyes. Yeah, I totally get it. Like, look at his eyes when he's
he's glowering at him.
Locks into whoever said that, and he's like, and it's a little bit of an anger, but it's sort of like, listen to what I'm saying.
Yeah. That's honestly that. I'm glad you pointed that out, because that actually is one of my favorite moments in that scene as well. It's really great. Yeah. So after the success of The Dark Knight, Hollywood kind of doubled down on its approach to genre filmmaking with the words like the 2015 version of the Fantastic Four or the 2017 Power Rangers reboot. Terrible movies, both of them. Both of which that gritty approach just was not justified. That's the thing; it doesn't work with everything. Like I'd say the only thing I could think of, the only franchise I could think of that tried to use the kind of grounded, realistic approach that worked was Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And that's because it had a reason for taking that approach that made sense. And I think those films, they fail because they didn't understand exactly what the Nolans and David S. Goyer were doing. They had a reason and a vision for why these characters should be grounded in a reality that at least somewhat resembles our own. You can take Batman and you can make him grounded and realistic without taking away the elements that inherently make him Batman, because Batman doesn't have superpowers, right? You can't do that with the Power Rangers,
right?
You can't do that with Johnny Storm. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like street level, like as far as you're going with superheroes, like street level superheroes, like maybe even like some of the Netflix Marvel characters.
Yeah,
like Gritty
Daredevil
works for
makes
Daredevil.
sense.
Yeah,
it works. It makes sense because he's just a dude. Yeah, I mean Daredevil has a superpower, but it's barely a superpower. You know
Not
what I mean?
Not a superpower that protects you from getting your face broken if somebody fights you.
Like he hears real good.
Right.
And I think this is what makes Batman specifically, more than probably any other comic book character. I think that what makes him so great is that, and why there are so many vastly different versions of him, any other comic book character. I think that what makes him so great is that, and why there are so many vastly different versions of him out there. He's malleable. Batman's kind of a blank slate. I mean, at least on film. I know in the comics, there's a lot more depth depending on at what point you're reading. But Batman can be campy and colorful like the 1960s Adam West version, or he can be your goth boyfriend like in the Tim Burton version, or he can be your Dayglow Schumacher Batman, or he can be the realistic Batman of Nolan's films. He's kind of a perfect canvas for a filmmaker to kind of project their own interest upon, know? Because Nolan, this is very much still a Christopher Nolan movie, and he's still very much telling the kind of story that Christopher Nolan will continue to tell in his other movies. He's just using Batman as the instrument to do that.
Right. I think along with what you're saying there is, because I am a big Batman fan and a big comic book fan, I've read quite a bit of the mythos, and you can see, like, more than a blank slate, he's almost a mirror for the times. Like, when it was in the 60s, it was, big, bright, colorful, campy. The 60s, in the 80s, things were getting kind of dark. So Batman reflected that.
And that was also a response to the previously established version, as this was a response to the Schumacher version.
Whereas, I mean, and I'll go as far as to say it reflects the society. So as we as a society progress, whatever direction we progress in, that ends up being what is reflected back in us in our mythology. And
and
consider, comic books are our modern.
If you view this version of Batman as a reflection of its times, this is a post 9/11 Batman.
Yep.
This film came out in the summer before Barack Obama was elected president. This George W. Bush is still your president. This is a post 9/11 Batman that exists in a world where the idea of using this is a Batman that exists in a world where the Patriot Act is a thing. That is where illegal surveillance, or what would in previous years have been illegal surveillance, is being used to find and persecute terrorists. I mean, that is what Batman is doing with his sonar thing. That is what Christopher Nolan is commenting on in that scene. I mean, it is 100% commenting on the Bush administration's use of surveillance. And that's, I'm not saying that, I don't think this is an inherently political film. I think I think The Dark Knight Rises gets administration's use of surveillance. And that's, I'm not saying that, I don't think this is an inherently political film. I think I think The Dark Knight Rises gets a little more specifically political. I don't think this movie has a political point of view. There are people who would argue with me. There are people who would call Batman a fascist in these films, but it is definitely taking a point of view in regards to that one specific issue. I think
it's at least saying that particular thing is wrong, but I think what it tries to do is walk the line of saying, like,
it's a necessary evil.
It's a necessary evil. Like, is this a guy who's I have to do this though? This is the point where this has to be okay right now.
And the movie isn't necessarily agreeing that that's the case, because it's got Batman's conscience in the form of Lucius Fox,
right?
The guy who's saying this is wrong. And we should not be doing this.
Well, we'll even take, for instance, I mean, the idea of, like, you live in a world where, well, who knows? And so then there's all of these things going on in the world today. It tackles the ferry situation, where in the end, nobody blows each other up. But technically, right before that, one ferry did decide to blow everybody up. They voted on it, and they voted to do it. and so it was like this, like, well, if I don't have to do it myself, like, if my hands aren't, if I don't have blood on my hands for this happening, fucking kill him.
And I think that
it's kind of weird.
And I think that lends a little bit to Joker's point. Talk is cheap. Like, you can talk and you can vote and all that stuff, but when it comes time to pull the trigger, who's going to step up? And what does that say about you? So, I mean, it while it is, to Justin's point, it is not really a political movie. You can't help but notice some of the things that it addresses.
It's a movie that wants to tease you with some of those political issues, but it's not going to give you answers. Like
It
it's
doesn't
like
necessarily take a one point of view over the other.
right.
So
It's
before
dancing around that.
Before we wrap things up, guys, I do think I want to address the end of the film, because this is, I think, where the film gets its title, The Dark Knight. It is. You could say that title comes from two different places. It's Batman becoming the Dark Knight because he now has to, he now has this crime hanging over him, which of course we know he didn't do. But it's also about Harvey Dent's transformation from who, Bruce early in the film refers to him as Gotham's White Knight, becomes Two-Face, the Dark Knight. But this is, what I kind of touched on before, that this is a turning point in Bruce's story. This is a point where and Todd kind of hinted at this earlier as well, he's become that symbol that he speaks about, but it's not the way that he envisioned it. Like he has to become the villain, and that's a turn in his journey that he wasn't expecting, that is going to have consequences specifically in the next film, of course. How do you guys read that ending?
He has to take on that role as part of being almost like what you were talking about before about Batman being malleable. I mean, even in this universe, Batman's malleable. That symbol's malleable. Like it's whatever it needs for the greater good. Like then that's the role I have to take. That's part of it. Well, and so it means more to have Gotham's White Knight than to have somebody actually be corrupted when you think the most, it's like you got to lie about it. This person was never.
We see a lot of that. Bruce has to make the decision because of the things that Harvey has done. I think it's perfectly put on display through eventually named Commissioner Gordon. First of all, when he, which I mean, my wife still, I can feel when she's sitting next to me tense up when the two cops show up to Gordon's home to tell Barbara that Jim's dead, and hearing her yell at Batman for bringing this craziness on us he's starting to really see what these decisions cost.
Yeah.
And when he ultimately says, "Hey, look, let me be the symbol. I killed those," what these decisions cost.
Yeah.
And when he ultimately says, "Hey, look, let me be the symbol. I killed those people," Gordon is very resistant at first. And he goes, no. And he ends up having to force his hand with the radio in it, call it in. And he takes off. It's what needed to be done. And we're going to see the fallout from that in a grand fashion in the next movie. But this is what it takes, and this is what it costs. And he really had to force Jim's hand to do that.
Cool. Well, do you guys have anything else before we start to wrap up?
Oh my God. I mean, the thing is,
I know we could talk about this movie for.
I was going to say, I knew we were going to go long, and we're talking about a top 5 movie on IMDb. So like
this movie brings up that create discussion. Here we are over a decade later, still running long. We easily blew through 2 hours.
Yeah.
Talking about this movie, talking about this comic book movie.
A comic book movie. Yeah. It feels like here's the thing. I know Gary had not seen this movie in quite a while. This is the second time I've watched it in like 3 months, probably.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you haven't seen this movie in a long time, you might forget just how great it is, because I feel like its legacy seems to have been lost in all the t-shirts and the Joker posters and the memes. But it is, if you get past all that and look at the actual film, it is a great movie. Not a great comic book movie, not a great superhero movie,
film.
Just a great movie, period.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we're in a world now where like the MCU has blown up Hollywood filmmaking. I even read a great article, blown up Hollywood filmmaking. I even read a great article, I think it was Polygon or somewhere, where somebody just did an analysis on how this movie upset the Academy Awards. Like that people were pissed at the time.
Yeah.
That this didn't get a Best Picture nomination.
Everybody
was expecting it. And
what happened with that, I hope this is not stepping on a point you were going to make, but what happened with that is that the Academy took the wrong lesson from that, just like Hollywood did with this movie. Instead of saying, hey, we should include more types of movies and more genres, they're like, let's nominate 10 fucking movies. And instead of just nominating a wider variety, they're like, let's just throw more spots and we'll nominate 10 movies next year. And then you get movies like Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close getting nominated for Best Picture, a movie that nobody gives a shit about, instead of taking the right lessons when it's like, let's get movies like Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close getting nominated for Best Picture, a movie that nobody gives a shit about, instead of taking the right lessons when it's like, let's just maybe consider genre movies.
Yeah. I think where the article's point was going was like, this is one of the first movies that sparked that discussion, that it at least began the movement that we get to the point of genre movies just being included
right
in the discussion. Of course, it took some evolution to get there, but no, man, I had so many more things. Like, did you see the Coleman Reese? The guy who was the fucking, like gonna expose who Bruce Wayne was, he's constantly referred to as Mr. Reese. And there's a theory that he is Nolan's version of the Riddler.
That's
Mr.
stupid.
Reese.
I hate that.
But that's a theory.
That's a dumb theory.
But that's a theory.
That's a dumb theory. I hate
it. But I don't know. I just thought, it was like maybe that is a nod there. I don't know.
I remember somebody made
you're talking about he's driving a Lamborghini. What's it called? Like a Murcielago, which is like Spanish for bat.
Well, I saw that somebody did a fan film that was to take place in the Nolan universe that had the Riddler as an FBI agent who was brought in to, oversee an investigation into the organized crime and, of course, into the Batman. And I thought that was an interesting approach to that character because
that would make sense.
Yeah,
I would point out a couple of notes I made just from that 0.25 speed guy. Just little what's just insane, like the idea that when Gordon's interrogating the Joker, like he's talking about like where's Dent, and he's like, well, what time is it? And he's like, what does that have to do with anything? It's like, depending on what time it is, he could be in one place or he could be in several. And Gordon gets pissed and he stands up, or he I don't know if he reaches out. I can't remember exactly. Whatever he does, in slow-mo, you can see the Joker turns and looks at his watch and stares at his watch for just a brief moment. So he knows what time it is. And it's just insane. Just all of these little stinking details that just make so. Oh, the other one I was thinking of is in the fundraiser scene. Joker with his shotgun. This is where I realized that the shotgun reappears over and over throughout the movie. He has the shotgun in the fundraiser scene. He fires it up at him.
That's great.
And I just thought that was wicked. I'm like, that's so cool.
Well, it's really kind of what they established a little bit in Batman Begins is Alfred's kind of a badass.
Hey, so we know that the critics pretty much loved this film. But before we wrap this up completely, because I know Todd's got another podcast or something to do here in a bit.
Todd.
We're running along, but
no, it's okay.
What happens when you're the special guest?
Yeah, I'll put everything aside to discuss Batman.
Before we move on, we have to discuss that there are some movie watchers that might not have loved this movie as much as some of the critics did.
Justin, it sounds like to me you're discussing that somebody might need a nap. I love that so much. I love that so much. Let's start off this week with Philos, who gave a 1-star review on Amazon. He said, 1 star because this is the worst portrayal of Batman I've ever come across, having been born in 1935 and experienced the comic book era from the start, listened to all the comic book characters on the radio, etc. I have wonderful memories. Batman is not my favorite character. I think Captain Marvel is, but I know and have enjoyed them all. Nevertheless, the scripting of Batman was terrible, and his voice sounded weird. 1 star because this is a really awful portrayal of the Joker. It's not the actor's fault. He did okay. It was just poorly scripted, as was Batman. So many have portrayed Batman in various movies. The current actor seems so immature. Go figure. I know many, perhaps all, will disagree with what I've written here. This is my opinion. I guess that rounds it off pretty well. How about this one? Bill Costas.
Get off my lawn review there.
Wow, what a turd. Saw this for $2 and thought I would see what the hype was about. Christian Bale absolutely sucks as Batman, period. The set and car were nothing special, despite being harped about previous to the film's opening. I suffered through 55 minutes and thought that was long enough. And what about the famous Joker and Heath? Been there, done that, nothing special. And if he hadn't jerked off while popping too many pills, he wouldn't even be mentioned.
Yikes.
Yikes.
Listen, it's not a bad way to spend a Friday night. Pop a bunch of pills and just see how long you can last.
Perhaps I mentioned Radio GB here, who gives it 1 out of 5 stars. Not enough nudity.
I mean, legit complaint, honestly.
Oh, all right.
That's it?
No. I was going to say, stick this out with me because now I'm getting into the real nap. Please do not show this to children or mentally healthy adults. It is not a moral guide for children to pattern themselves after, which is the purpose of this genre. It is the opposite. It depicts the hero as a morally confused individual unworthy of children's aspirations, and it corrupts or kills the 2 other lead characters. It represents standing up for what is right against evil as useless and even harmful. It promotes the sort of moral confusion and cowardice that allows psychopathic monsters like Hitler, Lenin, and Stalin to take power and murder millions of people.
That's giving Batman a lot of credit.
They are a focus for a coalition of sociopaths who want to rule and terrorize everyone else into submission. They can gain power only when most people are too morally confused by their propaganda and or are too cowardly to take a stand against them. They have no power unless people give it to them. We need to evolve past the stand against them. They have no power unless people give it to them. We need to evolve past this or continue to suffer atrocities on large scales. This movie promotes the wrong response and leaves us vulnerable to allowing monsters to take power. Destroying children's heroes and their models for who they decide they would like to emulate should never be allowed. If the makers of this movie wanted to deal with dark and morally negative stories, they do not need to degrade and destroy well-known and well-loved children's heroes to do so. This movie is reprehensible.
Does that guy know that, like, in Batman's first appearance, he shot like 3 dudes with a gun?
I don't know. Oh, God. All right, I'm going to do one more and we'll let it go. This review is being written about 4 years after the film's initial release and very close to the last installment of the Nolan's franchise. While a 1-star review is a bit harsh, it can be justified. I hadn't seen the film since the opening weekend 4 years ago and thought it was solid, so I decided to finally pop in the Blu-ray. Joker's alcoholic father, the character was one-dimensional the whole time, had zero depth of motives beyond insanity. The Joker character also had gobs of different cronies at every turn. The opening robbery, the scene invading a dinner party, the scene capturing a black mob boss, etc., etc., etc. Every time these followers seemed willing to die for the Joker's cause, which was nothing. Were they paid? Is it ever made sense where these literally hundreds of bad guys came from? Even insane Arkham recruits would have been incompetent or killed the Joker themselves. Also, the Joker's elaborate plans of bombs, robberies, kidnappings, escapees, re-escapes, mind games, poisonings, and power plays would have been impossible to implement either by resources, time, or manpower. I know it's a comic book film, and it needs to be allowed some leeway, but it was so unbelievable. This film is titled The Dark Knight, but there was barely any Batman or Bruce Wayne involved, albeit in limited doses, most of which was just punch throwing. Plans of bombs, robberies, kidnappings, escapees, re-escapes, mind games, poisonings, and power plays would have been impossible to implement either by resources, time, or manpower. I know it's a comic book film, and it needs to be allowed some leeway, but it was so unbelievable. This film is titled The Dark Knight, but there was barely any Batman or Bruce Wayne involved, albeit in limited doses, most of which was just punch throwing. I give it A+ for action and special effects, but there was no feeling behind what was happening. The runtime was way too long, and I feel the peak happened when the Joker was trying to kill Dent in the SWAT van. This was halfway through the film. I probably won't watch this film ever again, but it drags to make me feel for any of the characters or storylines. While the film as a whole isn't terrible, as the title suggests, this film is a product of being ridiculously overhyped, overrated, to the point of madness, just like the Joker. Obviously, this is my opinion. There are 1,000 5-star reviews. I know I'm in the minority. I'm looking at The Dark Knight Rises with hope, but it looks like more of the same.
Wow. Wow.
Anyway.
You, sir, might need a nap.
He needs a nap.
Well, that's it for our discussion on The Dark Knight, because otherwise we will go on for 2 more hours, and we're not going to do that to anyone until next week when we talk about The Dark Knight Rises. If you guys want to watch that along with us, you can find it streaming in all the usual places, I am sure, or head to cinemashock.net, where we will have a link to all the places where you can stream that. Or buy the Blu-ray or whatever you want to do. So thank you, Todd, for joining us.
Thanks
Sorry
for
we
having me.
over. Thank you, Gary, for reading those wonderful reviews.
Todd,
You guys want to tell everyone where you can be reached on the internet?
Yeah, I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond T-shirts. I
Just
bought
DM. Slide up in his DMs.
Yeah. If you want a cool T-shirt designed by our good friend JP Newton.
Isn't there a button to purchase them like on your Facebook page?
Yeah, if you actually go to my Facebook fan page, the Shop Now button will take you directly to JP's site where he's selling the T-shirts.
It's on Etsy.
It is.
Other organisms.
Yes, other organisms.
Yeah. Gary
is at This Is Gary Horne on all of the websites. I don't have any T-shirts for sale, but if you would like one, you can DM me and I will cut the sleeves off of a shirt just for you. And I will send that over. I'm wearing
Guns
a
out,
sleeveless
Gary.
right now.
I am at Justin_Bishop. I have lots of T-shirts. None of them are officially for sale, but everything's negotiable.
But you would sell
price.
one. Yeah, you would sell.
Everything has a price.
Or lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other.
Johnny has the keys.
Was that your Joker voice?
I think it was the Joker.
I was trying to go just subtle with it. I didn't want to really try to do a Joker voice.
Try again. Take 2. Do your Joker voice.
Let's see. Joker has the keys.
Joker has the keys.
Johnny has the keys. It's
well, you're giddy. You're laughing a lot.
Yeah.
It feels like it could be Todd Davis as the Joker.
Yeah. No,
Let's keep this
I'm done.
going.
I'm useless.
All right, we should go now. We've oversold it.